The pungent smell of disinfectant wrapped around my limbs. I snapped my eyes open, my gaze landing on the electronic calendar by the bed. The date was clearly displayed. Exactly 3 months remained until the global cataclysm and the end of the world. My limbs were not ulcerated. My throat no longer burned like fire from prolonged dehydration. And I was not wearing the blood-stained, tattered coat I had used for cover in the late stages of the apocalypse. I looked down at my palms. The skin was smooth and intact, without the permanent scars left by zombie bites. I was lying in an ordinary hospital room attached to the rental apartment complex, having just been brought in after fainting from long-term sleep deprivation and low blood sugar. The hospital door was gently pushed open, and Lin Hao walked in slowly, carrying a bag of cheap bread and a bottle of room-temperature mineral water. He was the boyfriend I had entrusted with all my trust in my past life, and also the enemy who had personally taken everything from me in the end. When the apocalypse broke out in my past life, I unexpectedly awakened a supernatural pocket dimension for storing supplies. I exhausted every effort to search for food, clean water, and medicine, filling the space to the brim. My only thought was to survive with Lin Hao, and I shared all the supplies with him. But in the 3rd month, when resources were at their most scarce and the water supply had completely dried up, he ambushed me with 2 wandering survivors. He shattered my kneecaps with a steel pipe, forcibly seized control of the storage space, and abandoned me on a deserted street swarming with wandering zombies, leaving me to be surrounded and devoured by the horde. Just before I died, I saw with my own eyes how he used my supplies to win over the entire team, relying on the space to survive comfortably, while lying to outsiders that he had gathered all the supplies himself. In the moment when piercing despair engulfed my consciousness, I never imagined I would get a second chance. Lin Hao placed the plastic bag on the bedside table, his smile warm, exactly like the hypocritical expression from my past life. I heard you fainted, so I came right over to check on you. Don't keep pushing yourself working and saving money, take good care of yourself. I propped myself up and sat upright, looking at him calmly. In this life, I won't reveal a single secret about the space, nor will I foolishly stockpile clean food just to hand it over to others. I'm fine. After a night's rest, I'll be discharged. You didn't need to make a special trip. Lin Hao casually sat down on the edge of the hospital bed and reached out to touch the back of my hand. I subtly shifted to avoid the gesture. A flicker of barely noticeable surprise passed through his eyes, quickly masked. Aren't we a couple? It's only right for me to care about you. When the rent is due at the end of the month, let's rent a bigger place together. Those doomsday rumors online are just for fun, don't take them to heart. I know that Lin Hao has been secretly scheming to drain my savings. In my past life, he coaxed me into handing over all my deposits, ostensibly to purchase survival supplies. But in reality, he secretly transferred most of the cash to another woman in a different city. I went along with his words casually, my gaze falling on the crisscrossing streets of the city outside the window. 3 months would be enough time for me to complete all my arrangements. I wouldn't stockpile any clean food or bottled water into the space. I had already figured out my own plan. That afternoon, I completed the hospital discharge procedures and returned to my rented solo apartment. This apartment had tight security, a private entrance, and required a key card for the elevator, making it an ideal base for early preparations. I immediately checked my bank card balance. After years of working, I had saved nearly 280,000 yuan. I opened the shopping app but didn't order typical doomsday supplies like canned food, compressed biscuits, or first aid kits. Instead, I contacted 3 local sanitation and cleaning companies to long-term rent large-capacity sealed chemical water storage tanks, while also bulk purchasing dozens of thickened anti-seepage hoses and high-power water pumps. In the evening, Lin Hao sent me a message, inviting me out for dinner over the weekend. I simply replied that I was busy and turned him down. Less than half an hour later, there was a soft knock on the door of my rented apartment. Through the peephole, I saw Lin Hao standing in the hallway, holding a cup of milk tea, trying to come directly to my door. I didn't open the door. Through the intercom, I told him I was tired and wanted to get some rest. The hallway fell silent for a moment, Then the sound of footsteps slowly faded away. I knew he was already starting to grow suspicious. I walked to the balcony, took out my phone, and searched for the locations of urban sewage drainage channels, industrial wastewater storage points, and domestic sewage treatment plants. In my past life, everyone fought desperately for clean water sources. After the apocalypse, water sources were widely contaminated by the virus, making clean freshwater 100 times more precious than gold. Everyone was obsessed with collecting clean water, but no one ever thought that space could store wastewater. For 3 consecutive days, I shuttled between various sewage stations, negotiating with staff for temporary water extraction periods and hiring workers at high prices to help lay pipelines. Lin Hao kept sending me messages, occasionally probing what I had been up to lately, and I brushed him off with vague responses every time. Unable to get any information through online inquiries, he began staking out the entrance of the apartment building. On the 3rd night, as I was returning from debugging the sewage tank, I saw him from a distance leaning against a street lamp, staring at the building's entrance. I avoided the main road, took another elevator from the underground garage, and made it upstairs without ever crossing paths with him. Standing by the floor-to-ceiling window, I looked down at Lin Hao, who still refused to leave. His nightmare had already begun its countdown. At 2 in the morning, the rental apartment was filled only with the faint hum of the instruments running. I closed all the curtains, locked the 3 bolts on the front door, then raised my hand and gently touched my chest with my fingertips. A faint silver ring of light materialized out of thin air, and my personal storage space slowly opened. In my previous life, I only accidentally activated this ability on the very day the apocalypse arrived. After being reborn, I tried several times and confirmed that I could now freely enter, exit, and store items. The space inside is a sealed cubic area over 200 meters in length, width, and height, constant temperature, vacuum, with no evaporation or leakage. Any item stored inside will permanently remain in the state it was in at the moment of storage. Dozens of giant sealed water storage tanks I had purchased in advance were neatly stacked in the living room, each filled with mixed sewage extracted from urban wastewater stations, including domestic sewage, river silt wastewater, and various decaying impurities. I activated a high-power water pump, connecting one end of a reinforced hose to the storage tank and the other end to the entrance of the space. The murky, blackened sewage surged through the pipe, continuously pouring into the silver light portal. The black water accumulated on the space's floor, quickly forming a foul-smelling sewage lake. The space had no air, so the sewage wouldn't ferment or expand, but the sediment, decaying garbage, and all other impurities inside the sewage remained perfectly preserved. I kept the pump running for 4 full days, transporting over 5,000 tons of sewage in total. Once the storage tanks in the living room were emptied, I immediately arranged for workers to deliver the next batch of full tanks. Purchasing the sewage, hiring workers, and renting equipment consumed nearly 200,000 of my savings. With the remaining funds, I bought only a small amount of sealed protective suits, gas masks, multifunctional tools, reinforced door locks, and enough waterproof gasoline, all stored in the physical apartment room, with none placed inside the space. I deliberately refrained from storing any clean drinking water, food, or medicine in the space. If an outsider were to open it, all they would see would be an endless expanse of murky, filthy water. In the midst of my busy schedule, Lin Hao continued to pester me relentlessly. He called me directly, his tone laced with dissatisfaction. "You've been avoiding me for half a month now. What exactly are you up to? I've been to your apartment building several times and never run into you. Are you planning to break up with me?" Leaning against the wall, I gazed at the continuously flowing sewage pipe and spoke calmly. "I've been busy lately stocking up on a batch of goods, running around everywhere. Let's talk about this after I'm done." Lin Hao immediately pressed further. "Stocking up on what? How about I come over and help you? 2 people would be more efficient. The delivery location is remote, so it's not convenient to bring anyone along." I hung up the call directly. Just 1 day later, the property manager contacted me to ask if I would allow a visitor to come to my home. The manager said that Lin Hao had come to the front desk multiple times, trying to obtain my floor number, and even attempted to use the pretense of being a couple to trick the staff into giving him access to the backup entry card, but was refused by the front desk staff. I immediately contacted the property management and left a written notice. Ban Lin Hao from entering the building. Do not disclose any of my residential information to him, and call the police immediately if he is found lingering forcibly. After handling this, I continued with the sewage collection plan. I purchased dozens of tons of industrial sludge and rotten kitchen waste, sending them all into the space to mix with the sewage. The sewage area inside the space kept expanding, stretching out into a vast, pitch-black, murky expanse. I repeatedly tested the rules of the space. Only the space holder can actively open the light gate, or with the holder's voluntary authorization, can an outsider open the entrance. Forcible violence cannot open it. To seize the space, there is only one way: kill the holder and claim the authority within a specific time window. This is also the fundamental reason why Lin Hao chose to ambush me in my past life. I anticipated his next move. Unable to track my whereabouts, he would only become more impatient and secretly planned to seize it. To lure him in, I deliberately placed several shopping lists on the living room table, listing items like drinking water, canned food, compressed biscuits, and emergency supplies, creating the illusion that I was stockpiling survival goods. Beneath the lists, I placed a photocopy of a bank card, which had only a few hundred spare change left in it. On the evening of the 7th day, I intentionally went out to purchase supplies and left the apartment. Before leaving, I activated a hidden camera inside the apartment. 2 hours later, I received a surveillance alert on my phone. In the footage, Lin Hao used a simple lock-picking tool to pry open the front door lock and sneak into the apartment. He rummaged through the room, repeatedly checking the shopping list on the desk, then searched every cabinet and suitcase. After scouring the entire place, he found only a few tools, no large stockpile of supplies. Frowning deeply, he sat on the sofa and pondered for a long time before finally taking out his phone to make a call. The surveillance audio captured his conversation. He was contacting 2 idle drifters, planning to attack me together after the apocalypse breaks out and seize all the supplies I had hoarded. I saved the complete surveillance footage with multiple cloud backups. With less than 2 months until doomsday, I continued transporting sewage, steadily filling up the storage space. Lin Hao would never have imagined that the supernatural space he dreamed of looting contained not a single portion of food or clean water, only endless sewage. Time flew by rapidly. With 23 days left until the global cataclysm, unusual incidents began occurring in cities one after another. Online news frequently reported unexplained violent assault cases. Some water sources turned abnormally murky, and the Weather Bureau issued multiple extreme rainstorm warnings. The authorities kept releasing announcements, urging citizens to remain calm. Panic began to spread through the city, with sales of bottled water and instant canned food skyrocketing on supermarket shelves. A large number of ordinary people followed the trend and hoarded supplies, and residents carrying provisions could be seen everywhere on the streets. Lin Hao seized the opportunity to spread rumors everywhere, advocating that an extreme disaster was imminent. He recruited 2 accomplices he had prearranged with and began scouting for young people living alone who had stockpiled supplies, planning to rob them once the apocalypse broke out. He still hadn't given up on keeping an eye on me, trying every way to confirm the location of my hoarded supplies. That morning, I went to the suburban scrap market to purchase thickened steel plates and anti-theft bolts to reinforce the doors and windows of my apartment. At an intersection, I ran into Lin Hao and his 2 accomplices face to face. When he saw me, he quickly stepped forward, a fake smile plastered on his face. "Long time no see. Finally ran into you. The whole city is hoarding supplies. You must have quite a stash, right? How about we combine ours and look out for each other when the apocalypse comes?" 2 accomplices stood behind Lin Hao, sizing me up with undisguised greed in their eyes. I replied calmly, "I haven't stockpiled much, just a few emergency supplies. Barely enough to survive on my own." Lin Hao clearly didn't believe me. He took a step forward and lowered his voice. "Don't play coy. Last time I was at your apartment, I saw the shopping list. A woman living alone with a large stash of supplies is dangerous. Better hand it over to our team, and we'll distribute it together. I worked hard to save up for those supplies. I don't need anyone else to manage them. I turned to leave. Lin Hao reached out to grab my arm, but I stepped back in time to dodge. There were quite a few passers-by around, so he didn't dare make any drastic moves in public and could only stop. You'll realize sooner or later that surviving alone in the apocalypse is simply impossible. Think over my proposal carefully. I'll come find you again. I ignored him and walked straight out of the intersection. I knew that after this chance encounter, he would be even more eager to find my supply stash. Back at the apartment, I began reinforcing all the windows, securing steel plates firmly to the outer walls. I added 3 separate deadbolt locks to the entrance door and filled the window gaps with explosion-proof ceiling strips. In the physical room, I kept a small amount of gasoline, protective gear, and tools to maintain the illusion of an ordinary hoarder. Inside the space, the total amount of sewage had already exceeded 8,000 tons, with sludge and decaying debris floating on the surface. I regularly opened the space to check its condition. In the sealed environment, the sewage remained stable, with no risk of spoilage or leakage. I repeatedly confirmed the rules. If an outsider managed to open the light door, the first thing they would see was a pitch-black, murky lake of sewage. 3 days later, various short video platforms began to regulate disaster-related comments, and many doomsday rumor videos were taken down. Instead of subsiding, the panic continued to escalate. Scuffles broke out in some residential areas over panic buying, and small-scale fights occurred frequently. Lin Hao and his 2 accomplices began scouting locations, recording the addresses of several women living alone. Using the phone numbers I had saved from previous surveillance footage, I found that both accomplices had prior records for theft, starting fights, and causing disturbances. I packed and encrypted all the surveillance footage and intersection audio recordings as evidence for self-protection in the future. Lin Hao kept sending me messages, alternating between soft and hard tactics, sometimes feigning warmth and persuasion to join forces for survival, sometimes issuing veiled threats. I only replied briefly from time to time, keeping his attention on me and preventing him from shifting his target. 7 days remained until the apocalypse. The city's water supply began to experience intermittent outages, and electricity was frequently cut off for short periods. Many residents moved en masse to low-rise buildings, while those in high-rise apartments grew increasingly anxious. I had stocked up on plenty of rechargeable batteries and solar charging panels in my apartment. I have no intention of leaving this high-rise apartment with comprehensive security. The floor is high, making it difficult for zombies to climb. And once the elevator loses power, the stairwell can be easily blocked off. Late at night, there was a faint sound of someone trying to pick the lock on the apartment corridor. The surveillance footage clearly showed Lin Hao alone, attempting to pick my door lock once again. After reinforcing it with steel plates, ordinary tools couldn't break through the door. After nearly an hour of effort, he got nothing and left reluctantly. I turned on the intercom recording and clearly captured his muttering. Once the apocalypse fully erupts and order completely collapses, let's see how long she can hide. As long as we snatch the supplies she's hoarded, the 3 of us can survive safely. I turned off the surveillance and looked at the spatial portal. The sewage was quietly sealed inside. I patiently waited for the apocalypse to arrive, waiting for him to go to great lengths to seize the space and personally open the door to his own hell. A piercing scream erupted from a distant street, and the apocalypse arrived as scheduled. At 7 in the morning, the usually bustling street outside the window plunged into chaos. The first batch of infected pedestrians lost their minds, violently attacking passers-by. Blood splattered across the asphalt road, countless vehicles crashed out of control, and the deafening sounds of collisions and cries echoed throughout the entire district. The global zombie virus catastrophe had officially begun. The power grid fluctuated continuously, and half an hour later, a citywide blackout occurred, with the tap water supply system completely paralyzed. Cell phone signals came and went intermittently, and soon mobile communication base stations failed one after another. cutting off the network. The operational order of the modern city collapsed overnight. I stood by the reinforced floor-to-ceiling window, peering down at the street below through the gaps in the steel plates. Hordes of zombies wandered aimlessly, chasing any living human. Several burning cars blocked the main road, with thick black smoke billowing upward. I pulled the blackout curtains shut and locked all the door and window latches. The apartment is on the 17th floor, and the iron door to the stairwell had been welded shut with steel bars in advance. In the short term, the zombies won't be able to reach this floor. The tools, gasoline, and protective gear stored in the physical room are enough for me to hold out in the apartment for a long time. I still haven't used the storage space, quietly waiting for Lin Hao to show up. Around noon, hurried footsteps echoed in the hallway, accompanied by low voices. The surveillance footage showed Lin Hao arriving with 2 accomplices, carrying crowbars and axes, heading straight for my door. He pounded hard on the security door and shouted, "I know you're in there. The place is crawling with zombies outside. Open the door and let's take shelter together. We can only survive if we help each other." I stood behind the door, making no response. After knocking repeatedly for over 10 minutes with no answer, Lin Hao lost patience. The 3 of them took out crowbars and tried to pry open the security door. The reinforced steel plate and multiple locks firmly secured the entrance, and no matter how hard they pried, the door remained unmoved. One of the accomplices spoke impatiently. "This door is too hard to open. How about we search for supplies elsewhere first? Staying here too long is too dangerous. It could attract zombies at any moment." Lin Hao shook his head, his tone firm. "No way. She must have stockpiled a large amount of food and water. We've searched for so long. We can't give up now. She can't stay inside forever. We'll wait in the stairwell." The 3 of them moved the fire escape cabinet from the corridor to block the stairwell and stationed themselves right outside my door. The hallway was narrow and airtight. If zombies were drawn here, they would be the first to suffer. Throughout the entire afternoon, the 3 took turns keeping watch. Meanwhile, growls kept coming from downstairs, and occasional zombies wandered up the stairs, only to be driven back with axes. Their fear only amplified the trio's growing restlessness. At dusk, one of the accomplices couldn't help but complain. "What if her space supplies are fake? We're just throwing our lives away here for nothing." Lin Hao gritted his teeth and replied, "There's no mistake. Last time, I saw her buying a large amount of storage equipment with my own eyes. She's just a girl, she can't hold on to that many supplies. We'll wait until late at night and try to break the door again. If that doesn't work, we'll make a move when she goes out to gather supplies." I listened through the crack in the door, hearing the entire conversation. I knew that after a long, fruitless stakeout, they would inevitably take the risk of planning a sneak attack. Night fell, plunging the city into darkness, with only the occasional glow of fire from distant burning buildings. The moans of zombies echoed intermittently throughout the night. The hallway was dimly lit, and the 3 of them were on high alert, their stamina steadily draining. At 1 in the morning, Lin Hao assigned his 2 accomplices to guard both ends of the hallway while he leaned against the door, thinking quietly. He speculated that I would rely on the supplies in my space and stay holed up inside indefinitely. If the stalemate dragged on, they would run out of the small amount of dry rations they had brought with them. A bold idea took shape in his mind. He planned to continue the stakeout, waiting for an opportunity to ambush me, kill me, and seize control of the space. He firmly believed that the space was filled with food and clean drinking water, and that obtaining it would allow him to establish a firm foothold in the apocalypse. I turned off the recording device and raised my hand to activate the storage space light door. Pitch-black sewage floated silently within the space. He was just 1 step away from opening the space on his own. I waited quietly for the right moment, not making the first move, letting him walk right into the trap. After dawn, the 3 people lurking in the hallway were exhausted. The small amount of biscuits they had brought with them were all eaten, and their drinking water was completely depleted. The anxiety caused by dehydration was written on everyone's face. Lin Hao knocked on the security door again, deliberately softening his tone. "Let's talk. We won't hurt you. You know how dangerous the outside environment is." Staying alone in the apartment will eventually lead to running out of supplies. Why not open the door and negotiate? We'll distribute the supplies fairly, and everyone will survive together. I walked to the door and responded through the security door. If you want to negotiate, you can only come in alone. Your 2 accomplices must stay in the hallway. If you don't agree, there's no need to continue talking. Lin Hao hesitated briefly, turned to whisper with his 2 accomplices for a moment, and finally agreed to the terms. He instructed his accomplices to guard the stairwell and rush in to support him as soon as they heard any commotion. I slowly opened a narrow gap in the door, just enough for Lin Hao to slip through sideways. Once he stepped into the room, I quickly closed and locked the door, cutting off the view from the stairwell. The living room was dimly lit. Lin Hao's gaze swept rapidly across every corner of the room, searching for large stockpiles of supplies. He only saw a few tools and several buckets of gasoline, but no large quantities of food or drinking water. His brows furrowed tightly. Where are your stockpiled supplies? There's no way it's just this little. I looked at him calmly. All essential supplies are stored in my supernatural pocket dimension. No one can see them without access. Hearing this, Lin Hao's eyes lit up instantly. His suspicions over the past few days were confirmed, and he suppressed his inner excitement. So there really is a storage space. It's too dangerous for a girl like you to control it alone. You should hand it over to us for joint management. The space is an ability I awakened, and I won't transfer it to anyone else. I slowly stepped back, putting distance between us. Lin Hao maintained a calm exterior while constantly probing for details about how to open the space and its access rules. He kept bringing up memories of our past relationship, trying to evoke nostalgia and lower my guard. We were together for so long. You should trust me. Survival in the apocalypse is hard enough. Being wary of each other will only lead us both to ruin. I let him keep probing, occasionally giving simple responses, deliberately leaking key information. The spatial light gate only requires the holder to actively activate it, and after authorization, anyone can open it freely. I pretended to let my guard down, raising my hand to simulate the motion of opening the gate in front of my chest, demonstrating where the light gate would appear. I deliberately acted as if I had exhausted my physical strength and was mentally fatigued, creating the illusion of being vulnerable to a sneak attack. Lin Hao took the bait, secretly tightening his grip on the short dagger hidden at his waist. The conversation lasted 2 hours. The 2 accomplices in the hallway kept tapping on the wall to send signals, urging Lin Hao to act quickly. Due to dehydration and the long wait, they were on the verge of losing control. Lin Hao slowly approached me, planning to strike when I was off guard. I had calculated the distance in advance and sidestepped to avoid his attack path. Don't rush into action. If you want to see the space, I can briefly grant you access so you can confirm the amount of supplies with your own eyes. But the permission will be short-lived, and I'll revoke it immediately after you've seen it. This proposal completely disrupted Lin Hao's plan. He abandoned the idea of an immediate sneak attack, eager to see the supplies inside the space with his own eyes. Open it right now. I want to see exactly how much supplies are stored inside. For a temporary authorization, I need to concentrate briefly without any interruptions. Stay where you are and don't move. I slowly raised my hand, channeling my ability, and a faint silver ring of light gradually appeared in midair. The silver light door hovered in the middle of the living room, its entrance facing Lin Hao. I set it as a temporary one-time authorization. Once the authorization took effect, even if I withdrew my ability, anyone with access permission could still open this light door independently within a short period. After finishing everything, I deliberately pretended to be drained of energy, swayed, and leaned against the wall. The access is temporarily granted to you. You can go and take a look. Don't touch anything inside, time is limited. Lin Hao rushed toward the shimmering light gate, his eyes full of anticipation. He imagined that behind the gate would be piles of canned food, purified water, and medicine, enough for several people to survive steadily for years. He never expected that what awaited him inside was an endless expanse of murky, filthy water. Lin Hao dashed to the silver light gate and eagerly leaned in to look inside. The piles of food, bottled clean water, and survival supplies he had envisioned were nowhere to be seen. As far as his eyes could reach, there was only a boundless stretch of pitch-black, turbid sewage, with rotting debris floating on the surface of the black water. A strong, foul stench seeped out through the gaps of the light gate. He froze, instinctively rubbing his eyes, suspecting that his vision was playing tricks on him. He leaned half his body forward to take a closer look. Every direction inside the space was filled with black water, with no visible boundaries. Not a single can of food, not a single bottle of clean drinking water. Impossible. How could there be only sewage? Where the hell did you hide your supplies? He suddenly turned his head to look at me, his voice filled with incredulous fury. I leaned against the wall, watching him quietly, offering no explanation. The brief authorization period had not yet ended. In his rage, Lin Hao instinctively reached out to touch the light door and attempted to step inside the space. He wanted to search deeper, convinced that the supplies must be hidden beneath the sewage. He stepped fully into the enclosed space, his feet immediately sinking into the cold sewage. The black wastewater rose above his ankles, and the mud clung tightly to the soles of his shoes. The stench completely enveloped him. The light door remained suspended in midair, connecting the living room to the sewage-filled space. It's all sewage. Where are the supplies? You deliberately tricked me. Lin Hao roared in fury. Just then, the temporary authorization began to waver. Standing on the outside, I directly cut off the basic energy supply. The spatial light door started flickering violently, and the countdown to its closure began. Once the light door fully shut, the sealed space would be completely isolated from the outside, trapping anyone without permission forever. Lin Hao noticed the light door shrinking and hurriedly turned around, trying to rush back into the living room. In his panic, his feet slipped, and he fell heavily into the sewage, the murky black water soaking his entire body. By the time he struggled to his feet, the light door was only a narrow slit. He threw himself with all his might through the space, crashing heavily onto the living room floor. The light door vanished instantly, closing completely. Lin Hao was covered in filthy sewage and mud, emitting a pungent stench. He gasped for air, his face etched with despair and madness. He had plotted for months, staked out for days, and was even willing to kill to seize the space, dreaming of obtaining a massive stockpile of survival supplies. Yet, after paying every conceivable price to gain viewing access, the space contained nothing but endless sewage. You knew all along that there was only sewage inside. You deliberately set a trap to lure me in. He stared at me, his voice trembling. From the moment I was reborn, I had planned everything. While everyone else frantically hoarded clean water and food in the apocalypse, I collected sewage and stored it in the space. You went to great lengths to snatch the ability, and now you've finally seen the space as you wished. I spoke calmly. The immense contrast shattered Lin Hao's psychological defenses. Countless days and nights of scheming, patience, and stalking had all come to nothing. He had fantasized about using the space's supplies to form a team and survive the apocalypse in comfort. But all those illusions were instantly crushed. He frantically tore at his sewage-stained shirt, pacing back and forth in the living room, muttering incessantly to himself. This can't be right. How could the pocket dimension be filled with sewage? Where are the supplies? Where did you move them? He lunged at me, ready to strike again. I sidestepped in advance and grabbed a steel pipe propped against the wall for reinforcement. In the hallway, his two accomplices, hearing the commotion and crashing sounds from inside the room, slammed violently against the security door. The welded door frame remained unmoved. Lin Hao lost his mind, repeatedly trying to summon the dimensional light portal. The temporary authorization had already expired, and no matter how hard he tried, he could no longer open the entrance. He kept replaying the black water surface he had just seen, imagining he had missed some corner, as an immense despair steadily eroded his sanity. Within just half an hour, his eyes grew vacant. He talked to himself incessantly, sometimes laughing wildly, sometimes growling in a low voice. The prolonged tension, coupled with the complete shattering of his dream, had driven him to a total mental breakdown. He has gone mad. He slumped onto the floor, covered in stains of sewage and filth, staring blankly into the air. repeatedly muttering words like sewage, supplies, and doomsday, having completely lost the ability to think rationally. Outside the door, his two accomplices kept ramming against it, shouting and urging Lin Hao to open up. I looked at Lin Hao, now incapacitated. Next, I needed to deal with the two waiting outside. All the suffering they inflicted on me in my past life, I would make them pay back every bit of it, step by step. The security door continued to endure violent impacts, the panel trembling incessantly. The two accomplices outside, having waited in vain for the door to open, felt their panic intensifying. The narrow hallway amplified the noise, drawing zombies wandering nearby. On the surveillance feed, several zombies could be seen slowly climbing the stairs, approaching the corridor entrance. I looked down at Lin Hao, who was slumped on the floor, barely conscious. His eyes were vacant, and he kept scratching at the residual grime on his skin, completely unresponsive to the sounds of impact from outside. He had lost all ability to communicate. I tied his hands tightly with a rope and secured him next to the living room pipes to prevent him from suddenly lashing out and causing trouble. Then I walked to the door and called out through the crack. Lin Hao has given up on the plan and won't open the door for you. The zombies have already been drawn to the hallway. You should leave as soon as possible. The banging on the door stopped. One of them shouted angrily, "Don't lie to us. Hand over Lin Hao and the supplies from the space, or we'll stay right here." Before the words faded, a low, guttural growl came from the stairwell below. Two zombies turned the corner of the stairs and slowly approached the two men. They hastily grabbed an axe to fend off the zombies, briefly falling into a struggle. The narrow corridor was not conducive to maneuvering, and the number of zombies would only keep increasing. Realizing the danger of their situation, they dared not linger and planned to evacuate the corridor to find another foothold. However, unwilling to leave empty-handed, they still issued threats before retreating. "We won't let this go. We'll find a chance to come knocking sooner or later." I ignored the threats and quietly waited for them to leave the corridor. Once the sound of footsteps faded, I checked the corridor surveillance and confirmed that the two had led the zombies downstairs with them. Once the upper floors of the corridor were breached, the zombies would continue spreading upward. I seized the opportunity to step out of my door, completely sealing the corridor entrance with reinforced steel plates, and welded it shut with rebar. After finishing the sealing work, I returned to the apartment living room. Lin Hao remained in a dazed state, occasionally bursting into wild laughter, only to break down sobbing the next moment, repeatedly muttering words like black water and space. I took out my phone and reviewed the complete recordings and surveillance footage I had backed up in advance. All the evidence of the three conspiring to rob and intentionally cause harm was fully documented. Unfortunately, after the apocalyptic catastrophe, the police station had completely collapsed, and the formal judicial system no longer existed. However, with all the evidence in hand, I could expose the true faces of the three when encountering other survivor groups. It lasted into the afternoon when Lin Hao briefly regained a moment of clarity. He struggled against the ropes and glared at me, demanding loudly, "Why did you put sewage into the space? A normal person would store clean water and food. You knew all along that I would try to take the space, didn't you? In your past life, you took my space filled with supplies and left me to the zombies. In this life, I simply prepared in advance. You were determined to seize the ability, so you have to bear the consequences." The brief moment of clarity quickly faded, and he fell back into mental confusion, writhing and struggling incessantly. I stopped talking to him, turned around, and checked the apartment's supplies and the reinforcement of the doors and windows. The gasoline, medicine, and food left in the physical room were enough for me to hold out alone for a long time. The storage space still contained only thousands of tons of sewage, with no survival supplies at all. Night fell again, and in the distance, the sounds of survivors fighting and calling for help echoed continuously. After the collapse of order in the apocalypse, human greed and malice were fully exposed. Many survivors formed small teams, roaming around to plunder the supplies of those living alone. I predicted that the two escaped accomplices would not give up easily. They know the location of my apartment and will likely contact other survivors, gather more people, and launch another assault on my door. I began organizing weapons, reinforcing materials, and setting up simple early warning traps in advance, placing them behind the steel plate barrier in the hallway. Late at night, Lin Hao suddenly fell silent, curling up motionless in the corner. I stayed vigilant, taking turns resting and keeping watch throughout the night to prevent him from seizing an opportunity to break free from the ropes and cause trouble. Revenge is far from over, Lin Hao and his madness. The two fleeing accomplices. All my enemies, I will settle the score with every single one of them. 3 days passed in the blink of an eye. The interior of the apartment remained stable, and the steel plate barrier in the hallway temporarily prevented zombies from climbing up. Every day, I checked the early warning traps at regular intervals and continued to observe the movements of survivors on the street below. The 2 accomplices I had driven off successfully contacted 5 wandering survivors, forming a 7-person team. They scoured the area for simple breaching tools, their targets set on my apartment. Convinced that I had a massive stockpile of supplies, they gathered their forces, planning to break down the door and seize everything. In the early morning, dense footsteps echoed once again through the hallway, accompanied by the continuous clang of metal striking steel plates. 7 people, armed with crowbars, fire axes, and sledgehammers, were working together to break through the sealed wall. A simple early warning device was triggered, and the alarm reminded me that the enemy had arrived. I walked over to the monitor screen to observe the entire squad. 2 familiar faces stood at the front of the group, constantly directing the others to take turns demolishing the barrier. The squad members looked fierce, having already agreed beforehand to directly subdue me once the door was breached and then search for supplies. One of them shouted up the stairs, "Open the door and hand over the supplies, and we'll let you live. Keep resisting behind closed doors, and once we break through this barrier, we won't show any mercy." Standing behind the door, I responded, "Lin Hao is right here in the room. You can talk to him. He has seen the storage space with his own eyes. Ask him what's stored inside." The crowd outside paused for a moment, then burst into laughter. No one believed my words. Everyone assumed I was deliberately fabricating lies to buy time. "Stop playing tricks, trying to fool us into retreating with lies. Lin Hao must be held hostage by you. Once we break down the door, we'll deal with you both." Under the relentless impact, the bolts securing the steel plate began to loosen. I had prepared a large number of heavy objects stacked behind the steel plate in advance, relying on their weight to slow down the wall's breach. After nearly 2 hours of stalemate, visible gaps appeared in the outer steel plate. I dragged the deranged Lin Hao to the window, lifted a gap in the blackout curtain, and let the team members downstairs see him. Lin Hao looked dazed, muttering aimlessly to himself, repeatedly saying "black water." Seeing Lin Hao in this state, the 2 accomplices began to waver. One of them shouted, "What did you do to him? Let him out now. He opened his own storage space. And this is what happened. If you want to verify it yourselves, you can wait until the barrier is broken and have him demonstrate opening the space. The prerequisite is that you can unlock the permissions." A disagreement arose within the team. Some members feared unknown traps and wanted to abandon the attack. Others, tempted by the supplies, insisted on continuing the breach. In the end, greed prevailed, and everyone resumed swinging their tools against the steel plates. The gap grew wider and would soon be large enough for a person to pass through. I activated the plan I had prepared in advance, opened the window, and poured a bucket of gasoline onto the floor of the corridor outside the steel plates. I lit a strip of cloth and threw it onto the gasoline. Flames erupted instantly, blocking the corridor entrance. The intense heat prevented the others from approaching further, and thick smoke drifted down the corridor. Fearing the flames and smoke, the team members hastily retreated, temporarily halting the breach. The flames cannot sustain themselves for long, only buying a brief moment of time. I knew that once the fire died out, they would attack again. While the fire held them back, I considered my next move. Simply holding the apartment can only ensure temporary safety, and the longer the stalemate drags on, the higher the risks become. I planned to take the initiative before the flames went out and find a way to split this makeshift group of survivors. The group has only banded together for supplies, with very little mutual trust, making internal conflict highly likely. I leaned against the wall and waited for the flames to weaken. Arguments echoed from the hallway as the group blamed one another and tensions mounted. The fire in the hallway burned for nearly an hour before the fuel was exhausted and the flames slowly died out, leaving only black ash and acrid smoke. The 7-member squad regroups outside the steel barrier, confronting me through the gaps. After a prolonged assault with no results, the thick smoke choked everyone, leaving them physically and mentally exhausted, and the internal conflicts within the team erupted completely. Some began to question the authenticity of the intelligence provided by the 2 accomplices. You swore there was a large stockpile of supplies here, but after such a long and fierce attack, we found nothing. Could it be that we were deceived from the very beginning? The 2 accomplices defended themselves vehemently, insisting that the supplies were real, only hidden within a supernatural space. The dispute between the 2 sides escalated continuously, with mutual suspicion and accusations flying. Seizing the opportunity, I continued speaking through the gap in the steel plate, amplifying everyone's doubts. You can ask Lin Hao. He was the first to see inside the space and confirmed with his own eyes that there was no food or clean water, only endless sewage. That's why he had a mental breakdown. If you keep fighting desperately, all you'll get in the end is a space full of black water. A young survivor wavered and spoke up with a suggestion. Maybe we should just retreat and search for supplies in other areas. There's no need to keep grinding here. 2 old accomplices refused to give up and harshly scolded the wavering team members. The makeshift team lacked a solid foundation of trust, and negative suspicions continued to spread. Some began to have second thoughts, while others were unwilling to leave empty-handed. The argument escalated, and shoving quickly turned into a fight. In the narrow stairwell, axes and iron bars swung at each other. Someone was accidentally pushed down, attracting wandering zombies from downstairs, and their growls rapidly approached the stairwell. Chaos spiraled out of control in an instant. Some survivors fled the stairwell in panic to avoid the zombies, while the remaining 4 continued to fight among themselves. The 2 original accomplices clashed during the brawl, turning on each other and disregarding their past agreements. I stood upstairs watching quietly, without intervening. The greed and suspicion inherent in human nature were enough to make them turn on each other, without any need for me to deliberately provoke it. Half an hour later, the fight in the stairwell came to an end. The team had completely fallen apart, with 3 members injured and fleeing alone, leaving only the original 2 accomplices behind. The 2 glared at each other, no longer trusting one another. The zombies continued moving upward, and the 2 were unable to keep breaking through the steel plates, so they had no choice but to hastily retreat from the stairwell. Before leaving, they still left behind harsh words, vowing to gather more people and return for revenge. The crisis in the stairwell was temporarily resolved. I quickly stepped out of the room, cleaned up the burnt ashes, reinforced the damaged steel plates, added new fixing bolts, and repaired the early warning traps. Back in the apartment living room, I looked at Lin Hao, who was still disoriented. He occasionally had brief moments of clarity, but every time he recalled the endless filthy water inside the space, he immediately lost control of his emotions. In his past life, he had imposed despair on me. Now, he was trapped in the despair he had created himself, enduring mental torment day after day. Survival resources in the apocalypse are steadily depleting, so I began planning long-term expeditions to gather supplies. Staying holed up in a high-rise apartment forever would eventually lead to resource exhaustion. Scattered across the city are countless unattended shops and warehouses, enough to collect the necessities for survival. I placed Lin Hao in a separate compartment, reinforced the door lock, and ensured he couldn't break free from the ropes while I was away. Before setting out, I checked my protective suit, gasoline, and melee weapons, and planned a safe route that avoided areas dense with zombies. I knew the 2 escaped accomplices were still a threat. There was a good chance I'd run into them again while out gathering supplies. The next time we met, I wouldn't give them the chance to form a squad and rob others. All grudges needed to be settled once and for all. After 3 days of rest, everything was ready. I locked the compartment holding Lin Hao, put on a full protective suit, grabbed my tools, and descended from the pre-surveyed fire escape window to head out and search for survival supplies. Zombies roamed the streets. I moved slowly along the shadows of building walls, avoiding large hordes. Near the commercial street in the city center, a collapsed supermarket warehouse caught my attention. The warehouse door was damaged, and inside, there were still plenty of canned goods and drinking water that hadn't been completely looted. I cautiously cleared the surrounding wandering zombies and entered the warehouse to gather supplies. Just as I was moving the supplies, familiar arguing voices came from the street corner. The two accomplices who had fled earlier had run into each other again, this time clashing over a small amount of dry rations. The two had completely turned against each other, watching one another warily. I hid behind the wall, quietly observing, not revealing myself immediately. The two struggled for a while, until one was injured and fled, leaving the other alone on the street, searching for supplies in a daze. I slowly stepped out of the shadows and stood before him. The moment he saw me, he instinctively tightened his grip on the iron rod in his hand. His expression panicked. "How did you end up here? You've come to my doorstep multiple times intending to rob me. Today, let's settle this once and for all." Knowing he was no match for me in a one-on-one fight, he tried to feign a truce, looking for an opportunity to launch a sneak attack. I anticipated his move in advance, dodged his assault, and pulled out a USB drive containing backup recordings and surveillance footage. "Before the apocalypse, you conspired to break into my home. After the outbreak, you repeatedly gathered your men to storm my residence. All the evidence is right here. If I ever run into other survivor groups, I'll reveal the whole truth." His face turned pale. In this post-apocalyptic world, anyone who deliberately preys on lone survivors, once discovered by other groups, would be shunned and expelled by everyone, making it nearly impossible to find a place to belong. I didn't lay a hand on him, only set a boundary. "Don't come near my apartment building again. If you plan any more attacks, I'll spread all this evidence to every survivor in the vicinity." He didn't dare to keep pestering and hurriedly grabbed the supplies before fleeing the street. In the short term, he lacked the courage to gather his men and come knocking again. The constant infighting and fear would slowly erode all his ambition. After gathering enough supplies, I returned to the high-rise apartment along the same route. Pushing open the door, I found Lin Hao in the partitioned room, still in a dazed state, barely surviving on the food I regularly fed him. He remained trapped forever in the cage of shattered illusions, day after day recalling the moment he eagerly opened the light door, only to be greeted by an endless expanse of filthy water. In my past life, I died in despair, torn apart by a zombie siege, and all the supplies I had painstakingly accumulated were snatched away by Lin Hao, who survived comfortably on my resources. In this rebirth, I didn't resort to violence to take his life directly. Instead, I precisely exploited the greed in his heart to set a trap. The supernatural pocket dimension he had dreamed of was, from the very beginning, a nightmare tailor-made for him. I reached into the air and activated the pale silver portal to the pocket dimension. The pitch-black, murky sewage lay quietly spread out in the sealed space. I had never intended to use this space to store supplies. Its sole purpose was to carry out this revenge. I piled all the newly collected food and clean water in the physical room of the apartment, not storing a single item in the space. The contaminated water inside the space remained as it was, sealed away permanently. Outside the window, the city was still overrun with zombies. Survivors were wary of one another, fighting and killing. The brutal apocalypse continued. All my enemies met their deserved ends. Lin Hao was permanently mentally broken, and his two accomplices fell into internal strife, living in constant fear and suspicion. Every ounce of suffering that had weighed me down in my past life was now fully avenged. With revenge complete, I was no longer bound by hatred. The reinforced and upgraded high-rise apartment was my safe haven, with ample supplies to sustain me for a long time. I could freely explore the city, search for a safer survivor settlement, or simply live out my days in peace within the apartment. I closed the space portal and drew the blackout curtains. The grudges of the past were finally settled. In the long apocalypse ahead, I would live only for myself.